My wife and daughter went to my retirement party without me and took credit for my career. He would be nothing without us, my wife claimed. I wrote his last report anyway, my daughter smirked. I sat in a taxi alone. Days later, they collapsed when they discovered what I left in the envelope for the company president. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. I'm 63, recently retired from a long, unglamorous career in defense engineering. I spent nearly 4 decades working for a major contractor in Arlington, Virginia, rising quietly through the ranks. I was never flashy. I didn't charm rooms or throw big speeches. I just solved problems and delivered results. My wife Jolene is the opposite. She's a natural in crowds, with a sharp tongue and sharper sense for appearances. We met when I was 28. She was working at a design firm, all charisma and confidence. She swept me up, and for a while, I was glad to be with someone who could fill in the blanks of my quieter life. Celia, our daughter, is 30 now. She's Jolene's mirror in almost every way. Intelligent, ambitious, and dangerously smooth. She runs a PR firm in DC and has been trying to elevate her professional image using my name as a platform whenever possible. They've always been aligned, I suppose. A little too tightly. When I was still deep in project management and R&D deadlines, I missed the warning signs. How Jolene began attending company dinners as though she was a partner in my career. How Celia started bragging online about growing up in the world of defense innovation, as if she had been more than a kid watching from a distance. For most of my life, I stayed quiet, provided, supported, tolerated. That's what I believed a good man did, until I realized that my silence was mistaken for absence, and they were happy to rewrite the story of my life with themselves in the starring roles. The retirement party was something the company wanted to do for me. It wasn't my idea. Honestly, I would have been fine with a simple dinner and handshake. But I'd led some major projects over the years, including systems integration for a Navy contract that had been a near disaster before I came in, and someone up the chain thought I deserved a proper send-off. It was set for a Friday evening at the Willard Intercontinental, the kind of place with gilded chandeliers and staff who remember your name before you say it. They sent out invites to former colleagues, project managers, and leadership. My name was printed on thick embossed cards. It was supposed to be a celebration. The morning of the event, I was up early, reading the paper in the kitchen. Jolene floated in, already dressed like she was walking a red carpet. Celia arrived shortly after, phone in hand, checking social media. I was in my room, adjusting my tie when I heard the front door open. I stepped out. You're leaving now? Jolene didn't stop putting on her earrings. We're meeting the media team first. They want pre-event coverage. Don't worry, we'll be there when it matters. But it's my retirement party, I said quietly. Celia rolled her eyes. Dad, it's optics. You don't understand how these things work. They left without me. I called a cab. I sat in the back, staring out the window at the city I had spent my whole adult life in. Everything I had done, every late night, every crisis averted, every report reviewed 3 times before submission, had brought me to this moment. But now it felt hollow. At the hotel, a security guard at the ballroom entrance gave me a puzzled look. You're here for the Granger event? I nodded. I'll need to check the list. I stood there, the man being honored, while a guard verified my name. Inside, it was a different world. My face was on the screens, a slideshow of my career playing quietly in the background. Hors d'oeuvres were being passed around. My daughter was on stage talking to a local media outlet. Jolene stood beside her, laughing with a group of executives. I watched from a corner. Nobody came up to me. Then I heard it. Lewis would have been nothing without us, Jolene said into the mic, as people chuckled politely. And I wrote his last report anyway, Celia added. The crowd laughed louder. I turned and left. 3 days earlier, I'd asked to meet privately with Malcolm Trenor, the company president. A good man, old school, someone who still believed in integrity. I handed him a sealed envelope and asked that he read it before the party. He did. Inside, he found my formal refusal of the post-retirement consulting contract. A resignation letter backdated to the week prior, quietly ending my affiliation before the party. A detailed report outlining financial irregularities involving Celia's PR firm and how she'd used insider access through me to get contracts she wasn't qualified for. Documentation proving Jolene had used my security clearance on several occasions to log into proprietary systems. A handwritten note thanking him for everything and explaining why I couldn't allow my retirement to become a farce. Malcolm promised he would take appropriate action. I knew he would. Celia's firm lost 2 clients almost immediately. One of them had already seen the report forwarded by Malcolm. By Monday, she was off the company website and facing inquiries from the ethics board for independent consultants. Jolene received a cease and desist from my former employer. She called me that evening. I didn't pick up. She texted, "We need to talk. This has gone too far." But I didn't respond. I left the house 2 days later and never returned. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't pack in a fury or write some dramatic note. I simply took the suitcase I'd prepared weeks in advance and drove north. I had leased a small cottage in Maine, just outside of Bar Harbor. It was quiet, coastal, and far removed from the suburban DC life I had led for decades. I chose it because nobody knew me there, and because the ocean didn't ask questions. Jolene called me the next day, 6 times. Then she tried email, then text. Celia too. Her messages were shorter, more cutting. You've completely destroyed me. You don't even understand how this will look. You've made a mistake you can't undo. I didn't answer. I didn't delete the messages, either. I read them once and moved on. Back in DC, the company quietly scrubbed my name from upcoming projects. The party photos never made it to the corporate newsletter. There was no glowing feature on my career. Instead, an internal memo circulated about data integrity and misuse of access credentials. It wasn't public wrongdoing, but it wasn't hidden, either. That's the thing about people who crave image. They crumble when the image is threatened. And for all their public poise, Jolene and Celia had no idea how to handle real consequences. It took some time to get used to solitude. For the first couple of weeks, I kept waking up around 5 a.m., the same routine I'd kept for years. I'd sit at the small kitchen table in the cottage, make a single cup of coffee, and stare out at the cold mist crawling across the shore. Sometimes I'd think about the version of me they thought they knew. The quiet man, the invisible man, the man they thought would never say enough. They underestimated what silence can mean. It doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes it means observation. Sometimes it means building the final act. The more I adjusted to my new life, the more I saw how far I'd drifted from myself during all those years of tolerating. I remembered things I'd let slip, hobbies I used to love. I'd studied photography in college before switching to engineering. Back then, I'd spend weekends in the darkroom. I started again, only this time, it was with digital cameras and long walks on the rocky coast. I found beauty in fog, in creaking docks, in peeling paint and tangled fishing nets. People in the town started recognizing me, not as someone, but just as someone around. The woman who ran the bakery smiled more each time I came in. A widowed man who lived nearby asked me to help repair his boathouse. We didn't talk much, but he brought over fish he caught every Friday. Nobody asked what I had done before, and I didn't offer it. A month later, I received a thick envelope forwarded from my old address. It was from the company. Inside were documents confirming the end of all professional and legal association, along with a personal letter from Malcolm Trenor. He wrote, _Lewis, we've concluded our internal investigation. Your information was timely, accurate, and invaluable. I want to express my deep respect for your contributions to the company, and even more, for the integrity you showed at the end. Quiet men are often overlooked, but history is written by those who act, not by those who perform. Thank you for all you've done. Enjoy your peace. Malcolm. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. From what I've heard, through former colleagues and whispered messages, Celia is now rebuilding her brand. She's leaning hard into influencer culture, pivoting into lifestyle strategy, or whatever that means now. Jolene's social presence has dimmed, but she still attends events. Alone. Neither of them have apologized. Not really. There was no acknowledgement of how they'd hollowed out my moment and painted themselves as the architects of my life. But I don't need their apologies. I needed their absence more. It's strange to realize how long I tried to prove I was valuable to people who had already decided my worth was only what they could mine from it. I used to imagine they'd one day see me for who I truly was. Now I understand that they did see me, only they didn't like what they saw, so they covered it with their own reflection. The funny thing is, I don't hate them. I feel distant from them, as though they're characters from a story I once read too many times, trying to find a happy ending that was never written. There's a small bookshelf in my cottage, and I've been adding to it slowly. Fiction, memoirs, nature guides. I read each night before bed. And some nights, when the waves are loud and the wind howls like an old engine, I fall asleep thinking about what I left behind. Not in regret, but in clarity. I left behind a life that had become a stage, and I left the actors to their audience. I stepped off quietly, without applause, and in the silence, I found myself again. The first time I saw Jolene again was almost 3 months after the party. I was coming back from the dock with a bag of fresh haddocks slung over my shoulder, bundled against the early spring wind. She was waiting outside the cottage, arms crossed, eyes scanning the shore as if unsure whether she was in the right place. She looked out of place in that quiet coastal town. High-end wool coat, patent leather boots, lips slightly trembling, not from emotion, but from the biting cold she clearly hadn't dressed for. When she saw me, she didn't smile. I didn't think you'd actually be here, she said, stepping forward. I didn't answer right away. I unlocked the front door, gestured inside, and said, if you're coming in, take off your boots. Sand gets everywhere. She hesitated, then followed. She sat at the small kitchen table while I put away the fish. I could feel her watching me, expecting me to break the silence first. Why now? I asked eventually, not looking up. She sighed. Because I didn't think you'd actually cut me out. Not like this. That part of her, The disbelief, the quiet entitlement, wasn't new. She'd always expected I'd bend, absorb, forgive without conditions. It was the rhythm of our marriage. She would push the limits, and I would pull them back into place. I didn't come to fight, she said after a long pause. I just want to understand what you think you accomplished. That was the moment I realized she still didn't get it. Even after everything, the cease and desist, the severed company ties, the silence from me, she thought this was about revenge. About a single night. It never was. I sat down across from her. No anger in my voice. No grand speech. I spent 38 years building something. You and Celia took one night and made it about yourselves. I let it happen for decades. That was my mistake. But I wasn't going to let it end that way. She shook her head, not defiantly, but with a kind of baffled grief. You think we didn't help you? Support you? I stayed home when you worked late. I raised Celia practically alone. I kept the house running. You were part of my life, I said quietly. But somewhere along the way, you decided you were the story. Jolene didn't reply. The wind outside rattled the shutters gently. She looked older than I remembered. Or maybe just tired in a different way. I want to fix this, she said finally. Whatever this is now. But there was no this anymore. Not in the way she meant it. I'm not angry, I told her. But I'm not coming back, either. We didn't fight. No tears, no shouting, no accusations thrown across the table. Just a long silence that settled between us like mist off the water. She left quietly. After that, I didn't hear from her again. Not directly. But news travels in its own way. A mutual friend, Warren, who had worked with me for nearly 20 years, sent me a message. Ran into Jolene at a fundraiser. She looked lost. Not angry. Just like she didn't know where she was supposed to be. I thanked him and didn't ask for more. Celia tried once more, about a month later. A single email. Subject: you really think this was fair? Body: you could have talked to me. You didn't have to blow everything up. You act like I was stealing from you. I wasn't. I was helping you look better. Do you even care what you did to your family? There was no apology in her message. No real question, either. Just indignation wrapped in the language of wounded pride. I never replied. The seasons shifted. Spring in Bar Harbor is slower, quieter than in the city. Buds arrive like a secret passed from tree to tree. I took to photographing abandoned houses along the coast. There's one in particular. Peeling white clapboard, half-collapsed barn beside it. Wildflowers bursting through broken floorboards. Something about it felt appropriate. I visited it often. Sometimes I just sit there, camera in hand, and think. It reminded me of what I had narrowly avoided becoming. A life so weathered by neglect and false appearances that no one even bothers asking what happened. They just look at the damage and assume it was inevitable. I began volunteering a few hours each week at the local library, helping them digitize their old town records. It was peaceful, methodical work. Names and dates, births and deaths, ships coming in and out of harbor. People who mattered once, whose lives had weight. Now just ink on aging paper. There's something humbling about realizing you don't need to be remembered loudly to have lived well. One evening, the librarian, May, a wiry woman in her 70s with a laugh like snapping kindling, asked if I missed my old world. I thought about it. I miss the work, I said. Not the people. She nodded. That's what my husband used to say about the Navy. There's peace in anonymity. I walk to the market. I fish when the weather allows. I read for hours and let the sea do what it's done for millennia. Move without needing approval. And yet, despite all of this, I still find myself drifting back to those final months before retirement. The quiet build-up. The subtle erasure of my identity. The moment I realized my life had been hijacked by the people closest to me, not with malice, but with assumption. They assumed I'd always be there. They assumed I'd stay in the background. They assumed I was too quiet to ever change the narrative. But the envelope I handed to Malcolm wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a line. About reclaiming something they'd chipped away at for decades. And now, each day I live past that moment, I realize just how much I gave away before I finally took something back. Sometimes, I think the hardest part isn't what happened. It's realizing how long I let it happen. That's the thought that kept returning to me during those first quiet summer days in Bar Harbor. The kind of warm, slow afternoons where the world doesn't ask much of you. I'd walk the harbor, nod to familiar faces, sometimes sit by the marina and watch strangers argue over how to untangle lines on rental boats. Nobody knew I used to manage billion-dollar defense projects. Nobody cared. And that was the point. There's a kind of healing that happens in silence, after years of being interrupted, overshadowed, or quietly dismissed. I found a secondhand bookshop off Main Street. The woman who runs it, Nora, barely looked up when I came in the first time. I like that. Over time, she began to set books aside she thought I'd like. Biographies of quiet thinkers, weather travelogues, the occasional mystery novel. I never told her about my past. She never asked. That, too, was its own kind of kindness. But the past, as much as I tried to leave it behind, has a way of creeping back in. It started with a phone call I didn't expect. The number wasn't saved. I answered out of habit. Dad, Celia's voice. Tight. Uncertain. I stood still in the middle of the living room, staring out at the driftwood scattered along the shore. I know you don't want to talk to me, she said quickly. And I'm not asking for a reset. I didn't call to yell. I didn't speak. I wasn't angry. I was just cautious. It's easy to fall back into the old rhythms, letting other people steer the conversation, letting them define what the story is. After a pause, she added, Mom told me what you said, that you're not angry, that you're not coming back. I guess I thought you were bluffing, that it was just some dramatic gesture. Still, I stayed quiet, not to punish her, just to give space. Let her sit with her own words for once. But I've been thinking. A lot. And I keep going back to that night. I almost laughed. That night. The night that was supposed to honor the work I built with no shortcuts, no PR spin, no flash. And they turned it into a performance. I shouldn't have said what I said, Celia continued. That line about writing your report. It was a joke. I didn't think people would actually believe it. They did, I said simply. She exhaled. I know. I made it about me. We both did. That's sort of our thing. That was the first real admission I'd heard. And for a moment, I felt the old reflex kicking in, the desire to soften, to say, it's okay. I understand. But I didn't. Because it wasn't okay. And she needed to understand that I wasn't just a quiet backdrop to her stage. I'm not calling to ask you to come home, she said. I know you won't. But I'm trying to change how I operate. I've stepped away from the agency for now. I'm doing freelance work. Smaller clients. More honest, I guess. I let that sit. I don't know if it means anything coming from me, she added. But I do respect what you did. You didn't yell. You didn't humiliate us. You just handed over the truth and walked away. That takes guts. I didn't know what to say to that. Not yet. So I just listened. I'm not expecting anything, she finished. But if there's ever a time you feel like talking, really talking, I'm here. Click. No dramatics. No manipulation. Just a call. And then quiet. It took me weeks to think about that call without an edge of suspicion. Years of being second-guessed and dismissed by the two people closest to me had trained me to read every word as layered. I didn't know if she meant it. I didn't know if it was growth or guilt. But I held space for the possibility that it was real. Not forgiveness. Just space. In July, I took a train into Portland for a long weekend. Visited old bookstores. Ate at a dockside crab shack where the tables were sticky and the food was better than any overpriced dinner party I'd ever sat through. I stayed at a little inn where the owners knew everyone's names by the second day and left scones outside the rooms every morning. It reminded me how small moments could still feel full. One evening, sitting by the fire pit they'd set up behind the inn, a man next to me, Robert, in his late 70s, asked what brought me up to Maine. I thought about lying. I almost said just traveling. But instead, I answered honestly, reclaiming my life. He chuckled. Took me until I was 65 to do that. What was your moment? I asked. My daughter read a eulogy for me while I was still alive, he said, without a hint of irony. Retirement party. She made it all about her. Her memories of me. Her struggles. Her growth. I was background in my own story. We sat in silence for a while after that. Then we laughed. Because it was absurd. And because it was true. I'm not bitter. I can't stress that enough. People assume stories like mine end in resentment. They think distance must mean anger. That silence must mean punishment. But I've come to learn that sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And slowly, day by day, I'm building it. The summer turned into fall with barely a whisper. In Bar Harbor, that means fewer tourists, chillier evenings, and that sharp smell of pine and salt that seems to hang heavier in the air. It was the kind of shift you feel more than see. I was learning to live in the in-between. Not quite lonely, but not surrounded. Not angry, but not forgiving. I was okay with that. But then something happened that finally brought it full circle. I got a call from Malcolm Trenor again. He's not the kind of man who calls without reason. So when I saw his name flash across my screen, I stepped out onto the porch and took the call in the cool wind. Lewis, he said, his voice as steady as ever. I think you'll want to hear this. He told me that the board had formally reviewed the internal audit I'd triggered with my documentation. The same one that exposed Celia's contract violations and Jolene's misuse of my credentials. The board had quietly voted to tighten its compliance policies and revise its ethics training to include a real-life case study based on me. The kicker? They asked if I'd consider coming in, just once, for a private presentation to the executive team about integrity in leadership. Not as a consultant, not under contract. Just as the man who walked away on principle. It wasn't about rehiring me. It was about acknowledging what they failed to protect in the first place. I said yes. I flew back to D.C. in October. I didn't tell Jolene or Celia. I didn't need to. I arrived at the same building I had walked into every day for decades. It felt smaller now. Or maybe I felt larger. Not in ego, but in presence. In clarity. The meeting was brief, respectful. Malcolm introduced me as a man whose legacy outlasted the noise. I talked for 30 minutes about ethics, about quiet leadership, about how losing your voice, over time, in small pieces, can be the slowest kind of destruction. They listened. When I finished, they gave me a standing ovation. That's when Malcolm handed me something I wasn't expecting. A letter. From the board, he said. Unanimous vote. We've decided to rename the Annual Integrity Award. I opened the letter. It read, the Lewis Granger Award for Ethical Leadership. To be given each year to the individual who, through action rather than words, reminds us who we are when no one is watching. My throat closed up. I hadn't cried through the retirement party betrayal. I hadn't cried when I walked away from my home. But in that moment, I felt something deep uncoil inside me. Not pain, not anger, just release. And here's where the true revenge comes in. About a week after the award was announced internally, the company's PR team began circulating the news. Quietly at first, no press releases, just internal bulletins and employee updates. But things don't stay quiet for long. The story leaked. Renowned defense contractor creates award named after whistleblower who walked away from his own retirement party. Suddenly, I was a name people wanted to know, but not for a wrongdoing. For a legacy. Celia reached out again. Not with anger this time, but desperation. She'd been trying to land a new client. A contract that would have put her agency back on the map. And one of the executives, a former colleague of mine, had declined. Given recent events, the message read, we're not comfortable aligning our brand with your current public narrative. Celia didn't beg. She didn't lash out. She asked me to help clear the air. Just tell them I wasn't trying to take credit, she said in her voicemail. Just tell them you know my heart. I didn't respond. Jolene sent a letter. A real, handwritten one. Pages long. More reflective than I expected. She acknowledged things I never thought she would. How she mistook proximity for partnership. How she blurred her role in my achievements. How she raised Celia to believe that performance mattered more than principle. She said she was sorry. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where Malcolm's first note had lived. I didn't reply to her either. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't even have to be something you do. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is a life reclaimed. A legacy restored. Now, every year, someone stands in front of a room full of leaders and receives an award with my name on it. Not because I played the game, but because I walked away when the game no longer honored what I stood for. Jolene and Celia have to live with the fact that, for all their charm, for all their maneuvering and spotlight chasing, the only name that outlasted them was mine. And I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to destroy them. I just told the truth, and then let them destroy themselves trying to outrun it. I still walk the rocky beach most mornings, camera in hand, boots crunching on shells. Some days, I pass by the old house with the sagging barn, the one with wildflowers blooming through its broken boards. It still stands, still weathered, still beautiful in its own ruined way, just like the life I left behind. But me? I've built something new, quiet, steady, mine.